There's one. Oh, there's that jig hooked him good. Fish was not coming off in a million years. There we go. Pop it out. So here we are. We're out here flipping heavy cover. We're flipping what we call water willows and any wood we come to. And you know, people ask why the jig? And from what I found, you always want to go with what you have the most confidence in to catch the biggest bag of fish, I would say. And the jig, to me, is the best bait for that. Like if I was practicing for a tournament, I would use probably the little creature bait because I feel like it would maybe get more bites, but it's probably going to get more smaller bites as well. So a good search bait, but you know, this is where I kind of know where the fish are or where they should be on this body of water. So I'm going with the jig, and the reason I love the jig so much is I've got a 3/4 ounce jig on here, so it's heavy, so I can cover a lot of water. You can watch it. You know, I'm not having to baby this thing when I'm pitching it. I mean, I can fire this thing in there and I can pitch it on the edges, or I can pitch it right back in the middle of it, and there's no guessing if that thing gets down to the water. I mean, I see it all the time. People try to come and flip or pitch this type of heavy cover, and they're pitching a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce weight or something like that, and half the time it never even gets into where it needs to be because it gets stuck because the cover's too thick. The other thing I really love about a jig is when you hook the trailer on it, the hook is exposed other than the weed guard, so it seems like you get really good hookups, but I'm not constantly having to fix a Texas rig that might come undone, or if you catch one fish on it, you sometimes have to get another soft plastics out to replace it. So a jig to me is just more efficient. Seems like day in and day out a jig seems to catch bigger fish. But another reason I love the jig so much too is I've got this thing on 25-pound fluorocarbon. I can use it on heavier line. I can use 25 or 30, where with the little creature bait and a lighter weight, you're going to use a little bit lighter line. Another thing I really like about the jig too is it skips low. Even this big 3/4 ounce jig, I can skip that underneath this stuff, where a soft plastic, you can't really get those to skip as nearly as easy. It's right up along the side of that dock. I was just working that jig down the side of it and just took off swimming with it. But as you can see, I'm not babying this thing. I mean, I'm pitching it in there, 1, 2, and usually those fish, if they're there, they're going to get it. So if I'm having to fish something really slow, just because it takes a long time for it to fall, it just takes you that much more time. There's one. Oh, I saw him come out and get it. He was way up there, little tiny guy. All I saw was a flash. I pitched up there and I hopped it and I saw the flash, and you know, an 8-incher could have been an 8-pounder. I can use this 3/4 ounce weight to drop it right in on top of those fish, because sometimes those fish will swim out and hit it on the edge, or sometimes they want it dropped right on top of their head, right in the heart of it. I prefer a jig. Why the jig over a crawl or something like that? Quick little story on that. It was the 1999 Bassmaster Classic. We were down in New Orleans. It was summertime. It was brutally hot, and back then they would give you like a 5-day practice, but it was a month beforehand. And anyway, we're down there, and it wasn't water willows, but it was milfoil. It was clumps of milfoil, very similar to this. And you could go, in the area that I'd found, I knew I'd found the winning fish. And you could go down along there, and you could pitch a jig up to the edges of this milfoil, and the fish would swim out and they'd eat the jig and go back into the milfoil, and you'd fight them, get them out, and they were big fish. And they're eating the jig. I found out that I could do the same thing with soft plastics. I'd catch more numbers, but the quality wasn't there. And so fast forward, we have a 30-day off limits. We go back, they give you 1 day of practice before the actual competition starts. So we go down to those areas, and I thought it was just an off day. I went along those clumps of milfoil, and I'd pitch my jig up there, and those fish would swim out. They'd look at the jig, and they'd go back under the mat, and they wouldn't bite. Fast forward a day or two, first day of competition, I go back to those same areas. The same thing is happening, you know, fishing, not catching them. I'd watch these fish swim out, look at my jig and go back in under the mat. So I ended up, I rigged on a 3/4 or 1 ounce weight with a little crawl, and I started flipping those same spots, dropped it right on their head, and I think I caught one fish that day. It was like a 3-pounder, but you know, a decent fish, but one fish. So not how you want to start the Classic. Well, the next day goes out. Well, I just start punching with this crawl all day, and I caught a decent bag of fish, like 13 or 14 pounds, and dug myself out a little bit of a hole. So I was catching the numbers again. I was putting it right on their head, and that's what was amazing, is these fish would swim out of a clump and look at your bait and not bite it, but if you dropped it on their head, they would bite. But I was throwing the crawl and I was catching numbers of fish, but the quality wasn't there. So I was really scratching my head. It was down to the final day of the Bassmaster Classic, and you know, at that point, you know, I didn't really have a shot at winning, but you're still going to go out and do it. Give it your all. So I got to thinking, I'm like, I just happened to have a couple, I think they were ounce and a quarter jigs. I'm like, well, I'm going to tie on a jig. I go out that next day, not flipping on the edges, started flipping right in the heart of the clumps of the mats with a jig, and I weighed in the biggest bag of the Bassmaster Classic. I think I weighed in 1915 that day. And it was just one of those things, I was so close, yet so far away, and it just took me a little bit too long to figure it out. So I always want to go with the jig first. That's just kind of my rule of, you know, if they'll eat the jig, sometimes it's the biggest ones, and go that route. But that was the year I should have won the Classic, but it just shows you just the finer little details can make all the difference in the world. If I would have made that adjustment a day or two sooner, I might have been holding up that trophy. My hat's off to Davey Height. That was the year he won. But it was one of those things, we as fishermen, we're constantly learning. I learned a valuable lesson in that one, and hopefully won't make it again. If I'd have tried that on that first day, who knows? I might have been holding that Classic trophy.